Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to our next session. This time we're going to take a little different path. We're going to talk about defensive techniques. So before that, we were looking in our lectures mainly in positions in which one side is trying to increase its advantage or to find a winning plan. But here we're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to examine positions in which we stand in the inferior positions and we try to hold on at least to make a draw. So most of these examples are from my own game, sometimes in the stronger side, sometimes in the weaker side, and we shall see a couple of very important concepts and techniques to try to hold on worse positions. So this is our first example, and I specifically wanted to start from this one because here we can see a position where black has two extra pawns. We have the queen endgame, and many people as white, I believe, would just resign in this position. And I even not trying to say that white's not winning and that black is not winning here. He is winning with the two pawns up, with this pawn being very much close to the promotion. White also cannot check on c5 because then black will play queen e5 check and will force the exchange of queens. So what can white do? Now, I was playing here with the black pieces and I was extremely confident that I'm going to win the game. I didn't even doubted it for 1 second, but my opponent was an extremely resourceful player. He never gave up easily, always tried to find some tricks and some cunning ideas, even in the very bad positions. So he suddenly played the move h4 here, giving up yet another pawn. And I didn't even took very seriously this move. I was just assuming this is a very desperate attempt to just give me some checks. So I took it very quickly. In hindsight, black could do almost any other move and it would be very easily winning. For example, king h5 would be a very natural move, and this way the black king is completely sheltered from any checks, and once white won't have any opportunities to create any immediate checks, black will centralize his queen and will eventually win with the help of this pawn. But after king takes h4, white played queen h6 check, king g4, queen h3 check, king g5, and after a couple of more checks, white decided to give me even another pawn. G4 was played, and at this point I really had no idea what's going on. Why is my opponent giving me even one more pawn, and now black is having a whopping 4 pawns up? What's going on? White played queen h3 check, and at this point I really felt like my opponent is just very desperate and is just trying to do some random things in order to try to save in position. I didn't really believe it's going to work. I played my king to f4, and here as white you can try to find the best move here, which draws the game. So I hope you stop the video for that. The move is queen f1 check. When I saw this move on the board, I almost got a heart attack, and I quickly realized that I have to take the queen, and this is, ladies and gentlemen, a stalemate. The game was drawn. It was a very painful experience for me because it was also a very important tournament, and what I wanted you to take from this example is Never never feel like you are winning, or be 100% sure you are winning. Don't be too confident until the game is over. And in the defending side, always try to be resourceful, try to find these kind of ideas, because many people, when they're in losing positions, they go down very easily. They feel frustrated or unhappy with the situation. They don't even try. And many times when one side is defending his position in a very strong manner and is trying to be very resourceful, a lot of times he will find good ways to defend his position or to create serious problems for his opponent. So let us move to the second example. So in this example, I was playing with the black pieces. We can see a curious endgame here. Black is having a pawn down with a rook and a knight for each side, but all of the pawns are concentrated on one side of the board. And keep that in mind, that when the pawns are concentrated only on one side, it always gives the defending side good drawing chances, as opposed to positions where one side has an extra pawn on the outside, like an outside extra passed pawn. But now let me introduce the second defensive technique that is very helpful in an endgames with a material disadvantage, or even for that matter just a positional disadvantage. So try to reduce the quantity of pawns. Why is that? So when our opponent has the material advantage, we want to exchange as many pawns as possible, because this reduces his opportunities to win. For example, he has less pawns to take. Second thing, he has less pawns with a potential to be promoted. So how can black in this scenario try to exchange pawns? Because at the moment the knight on f4 is hanging, so try to stop and think. Stop the video. So black played here the move g5, I believe to be a good practical chance. Because if the knight goes on f5, black has a nice little tactic, knight takes h5 check, followed by rook takes knight when black equalized the game. Another thing that you should be noting, that if white played knight g2, knight takes g2, king takes g2, we get a rook endgame. And now this is also something to keep in mind. Out of all possible endgames which exist in chess, bishop's endgame, knight endgames, queen endgames, any kind of endgame that you can imagine, rook endgame is usually the hardest to win with a material advantage. So for example, here you see a position where white has an extra pawn, but I believe this is just a dead draw position, because white will find it very hard to win with a reduced material. So this is also something to keep in mind. If you have the possibility, try to reach a rook endgame. Usually it will give you better drawing chances than a knight endgame, for example. So if we take the initial position, if I try to exchange the rooks, it doesn't help me as much as exchanging the knights. So after g5, white was practically forced to take the pawn on g6 en passant. Knight took on g6. As we know, white is not interested in exchanging off on g6, because then we reach a rook endgame. So he played the knight to g2. Also notice that white is not happy with playing the move knight to f5, because if we remember that in a worse endgame we try to reduce the quantity of pawns, here black a very easy h5 move, which helps him to get rid of one more pair of pawns, thanks to this little tactic, after which we reach a once again a rook endgame with only one pawn for white, which is definitely not enough to win. This is a drawn position. So white played the knight to g2. So after a couple of more moves, black played the rook to b7, trying to penetrate on b3. White didn't allow this. I played the rook to b4, trying to play actively. White played a very natural move, f5. So here black to move, and I give you the opportunity to try to find a resource here for black in order to try and draw the game. So instead of moving the knight on g6, which would be the obvious move here, I found a nice move here, which is pawn to h5. So this is a combination of two defensive principles which we talked earlier. So black is trying to be resourceful, trying to find resources to make white winning conversion more difficult, and he also tries to reduce the quantity of pawns. But it's extremely important to know, in order to play the move h5, that this endgame, which can arise after pawn takes knight, rook takes g4 check, king f3, rook takes g6. This is a theoretical drawn position. So a rook and a knight versus a rook should be a draw, and also relatively not a very difficult draw to make. So this is another tip I wanted to give you about defending endgames. So try to be aware of some theoretical drawn endgames. So if you know, for example, that a certain endgame is drawn even with one side having a significant material advantage, you might strive to get this kind of endgame while your opponent might not be aware that this endgame is drawn, so he might go for it, and you will get draws in many cases with this technique. So know your endgames, know the theoretical drawn positions. That's another defensive tip for you. Now, white realized that he cannot take the knight on g6. So he also can take the pawn on h5. But now we see that the pawns are no longer connected. So I simply wanted to play my knight to e7 here. And even though white is 2 pawns up at the moment, my rook is doing a very good job of cutting off his king from defending those pawns. And after, for example, rook a5, I play king to f6. The pawn is under attack. For example, knight e3, king g5. That's, in my mind, a very picturesque position. White is 2 pawns up, but black is extremely active with his pieces. He managed to activate his king, his knight, and I think on the next moves, black will definitely pick up one of white's pawns at least, and he will reach an endgame with only one extra pawn for white without any other pawns on the board. So he will be able to draw by reducing the quantity of pawns and playing actively. So white tried to play here the move rook a7 check, king h6. Once again, the knight is untouchable because then black will be able to take away all of white's pawns. He played knight to a3. So now, once my knight got the chance, now it would be a mistake, I think, to play the move pawn takes pawn, because after rook a6, please notice that here white is able to take away the knight, but without giving up his own pawn. So this would be a grave mistake. White will win here. So I played the knight to e5, rook a6 check, king g5. You will notice that my king is now positioned in a very active position. which I think is perhaps the most important principle in a defense of a war's endgame, is always try to strive for activity. Never try to defend your position passively, because in almost all cases passive defense is doomed to failure, while active defense very often saves games. Now the pawn on g4 is already under many attacks, so white took the pawn on h5. And here black can even simply take on h5, but once again I wanted to play for activity, so I played rook to b3, attacking the knight, forcing his king to go down to a passive position. I even pushed him slightly more away with rook b2, king f1, and now when the king is extremely far away from the action, I simply took the pawn on h5, and the game was drawn, as this pawn is not going to give white the win because his king is cut off. My king and knight are very active, and black's resources to draw the game are more than sufficient. So let us see the next example, and this one is one I like very much. So it is black to move. It's once again my game that I've played against in the Israeli league against the grandmaster. It's black to move, and at this point I thought for maybe 20 minutes about my next move, and it seems to be ridiculous because black has a very obvious move in his hands. So it is to take the pawn and equalize the material. But then I thought that if I take the pawn, white will play the move rook a6 with the intention of taking my pawn on f7, on a7. I would be then forced to play rook to c7 to defend it passively. And now I am in a very passive position where white is attacking my pawn while my rook is passively defending it. And now white can very easily play king g2 and step by step bring his king to the center of the board, and also trying to highlight my weaknesses, mainly on the e5 square. This is a very weak pawn. I didn't want to get myself into a passive position, even though it is a material equality. So I will give you the chance to find an active plan as black to try to hold the position actively, not to play in a passive manner like I wanted to avoid. So try to think and find some active plan for black here. So I came up with a nice idea here, I believe. I played the move rook to c4. So attacking this pawn on g4. White is not too happy to give up the pawn on g4 too easily, so he played h3. And now I played the move rook to a4. This was the main point of the move rook to c4. Now I'm the one to attack his pawn on a2, and now he's the one who is forced to defend it passively. And now, even though the position white kept his extra pawn, I believe that thanks to black's very active pieces, he should be able to draw the game fairly comfortably. So I played the rook to c4. He was forced to play rook to c2. Now my rook is dominating his rook. But white has still a plan of bringing his own king to the center of the board, trying to drive my rook away. So now this is a very critical point in the game, I believe, where I went astray and eventually lost the game. But here is black to move. And once again, I invite you to try to find a good plan for black here, and with the intention of being very active, to try to activate your pieces. How can black try to create active counterplay here against white? So I made a mistake here. I played the move f5. The right plan here for black would be to play the move king to g7, and with the intention of penetrating into his position via the square h4, try to highlight the weakness of the h3 pawn. And I believe if black would have done this, he would be able to hold the draw in this position very easily. But after I made my mistake f5, the reason this was a mistake that now I created a lot of weaknesses in my pawn structure, and white played an excellent move here, rook to b2, practically giving me the pawn on c3. If I take it, now white can play rook to b5, where you can see that my pawns are very easy targets for him. So after rook b2 I was forced to bring my king into the center, but now I lost the whole point of placing my rook on c4 and trying to force him into passivity. I let his rook get active, and in this position white's extra pawn is much more significant than it was before, because he can start pushing it forward. Now his rook is no longer passive, is very active to do whatever he wants, and later on white managed to win the game. But I did feel good about myself after the game, that I didn't go down easily, and I've managed to create problems for my opponents in converting his advantage. I played actively, and if I would found this plan of king g7 to activate my king, I think I would have a very good chances to draw the game. So let us summon the things we've learned in this lecture. So when you on the defensive side, you should be usually very much resourceful to find all kinds of ideas to disturb your opponent. Don't give up easily. The opponent only wants you to give up easily and to just win the game very easily. Usually, if you play very resourcefully, it will also kind of frustrate your opponent that he's not winning so easily like he would like to, and you will save many games this way. Second thing which we learned is that you should try to reduce the quantity of pawns. Usually, you on the defensive side, you want on the board to be as much less pawns as possible, basically. And also, perhaps the most important thing of all, always strive for activity. Try to play active chess. If you need, you should also give up material if the position requires so. Never try to defend a worse endgame passively, because the classics told us and practice showed that it almost never works in practice. Always strive for activity. So I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you all for watching. Bye bye.